Hello and welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Concept Show on the PAUK network. I'm Paul Rook and you are you're listening to obviously us. Today we are joined as always by Kerry Greenway and Richard Clements. Hello guys.
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Been up to much?
Go and check out the start of next week's show.
Checking out my chocolate supplies, that's about it really.
Oh, at least you've got chocolate supplies.
Well, we all know about Kerry and her chocolate supplies. Keeping Cadbury's in business, that woman.
Honestly, things would have gone badly wrong if I couldn't get hold of chocolate supplies, I'm telling you now.
Yeah, you'll get very hangry, won't you?
Very, very hangry.
Yeah. And people won't like her when she's hangry.
No.
Trust me, we know.
Well, seeing as there's not much to report, let's crack on with the subject we're talking about this week. We are delving back into the 18th century, and we're going to be discussing smugglers.
Yeah, smugglers. This comes off the back of this triggered off of back of last week's show with John Fraser. We were talking poltergeist last week, but he ended on a good old ghost story, didn't he, of a place he'd investigated up in Scotland.
Yeah.
To do with the traditional image of a good old smuggler. So it led us down a little rabbit hole of smuggling. And, you know, because we'd also talked about this before regarding some of the myths and legends and folklores regarding smugglers. So we thought this would be quite a nice little topic to bring to you on lockdown. As you do.
Whilst you're getting your contraband chocolate in, Karin.
Yeah, that's it. Getting my contraband chocolate in. Yeah, this is true fact.
and you know, I've been practicing the smuggling as well because I've smuggled the pillows from the bedroom to the front room.
Always worth it.
Yeah,
always worth
just
it.
to make myself feel uncomfortable. So yeah, I've been smuggling this week.
So everyone's moving rooms around now, isn't it? It's like, it's just to get a different perspective on the subject. Same room, different furniture, it's fine.
Well, yeah.
Now, smuggling is the illegal trade in goods. Now, we know about this in modern times, don't we? Mainly with the drug trade, these days. But back in the 18th century, it was kind of known as the golden age of smuggling. It's one of those times of history that's very romanticised. You have a very romanticised view of it, don't we?
Well, yes. I mean, it sort of brings up the sort of images. Was it Catherine Cookson and sort of Cornwall and Devon coast? Yeah, it sort of definitely brings back the lantern carrying sort of man standing on the cliffs. That's got to be right, isn't it?
Oh, yeah,
I think, with smuggling, it was almost a case of, like how we all like a good bargain these days, and shops tend to accommodate us for the bargains.
Yeah.
But back then, they never had that, so this was like the only way they could get a good bargain.
Well, it was a way of survival as well, wasn't it? Trying to survive in very harsh economic times. Because in the 17th century, the government introduced import duties on a range of goods. Now, Of course they did. We see it all the time.
Well, yeah.
Particularly in cigarettes these days, particularly as they're trying to get everyone to stop smoking. But back then, they were encouraged to smoke, I would say. And these things, they would come in. The excise duties were put up really high, which took it out of the premise of a lot of people and ate away at the profits of people that were trading in those goods. Mm-hmm. So smuggling kind of was like a natural progression because they could get it into the country without paying these duties and make them more comparable price-wise, and profit is always what drives the day, isn't it?
Well, yeah,
absolutely, yeah.
More and more goods were being taxed back in these days, and people didn't have the money to back that up with, so like wages weren't going up in comparison, so the cheaper you could get the goods, the better, and it's no different today, really.
No, that's it. I mean, the government liked to tax everything, didn't they? I mean, this is why when, as an investigator, you go out to locations and you see windows bricked up. But the reason windows were bricked up initially was that there was a window tax.
Yeah.
So, we'll get around it by bricking a window, then we ain't got to pay that bit.
Yeah, exactly. That's part, wasn't that Georgian times?
Or if you go and see the old Tudor houses, the upper floors overhang the lower floors because you would have had to have paid a ground tax. So you would have built your lower floor on ground level smaller and have your upper floors overhanging.
So there are many ways that people would get around government taxation, and smuggling in the 17th and 18th century was absolute massive business. And I think one thing we've all learned through this little foray of rabbit hole was the extent of smuggling.
Definitely, there's loads.
It was a major industry. I mean, and it wasn't, and going through some of this research, it wasn't even done clandestinely either. It was done quite blatantly, but as we will find out as we go along.
Yeah, definitely. Now there were two kind of categories of taxation. One was the ones that were administered and collected by a separate government department, and then customs duties. So that was the cargo entering the country.
Yes.
Yeah? And then there would be a financial levy on that. So in lieu of like fine wines, bolts of fabric and stuff like that, they'd add that on to bring that into the country. So basically it should generate more money for the exchequer. That's the import duties. Yeah. And then there was the war duty, the civil war duty, which actually took a tax on land, took place of two older taxations. It gets very confusing because they changed the law quite a lot around this time. But basically, wars cost money, and they raised money for these by increasing taxation on the public, right?
Well, that was the go-to way of financing wars back in the day. I mean, the Parliament or the King would actually just raise taxes on certain products, and or commodities, and land would have been, because everyone owned land in some form or another, so that would have been a natural place to go to increase the taxes on.
Yeah. And domestic consumption, so it would be put on goods that you bought.
Well, that's it, And obviously during the war, it covered so many different items, but after the war, they reduced it, didn't they, just to cover chocolate, coffee, tea, beer, cider, and spirits.
All the good stuff.
Yeah, that's it. And then
all the stuff that makes life worth living, right?
Yeah,
exactly. And mind you, even now, you get the financial thing every year, don't you, on the telly? And they talk about tax going up or down or staying the same. And it's always like the spirits that are always kept low, and then cigarettes and everything go sky high.
Yeah.
Tobacco, coffee, all those things that we, like they consider... pleasurable, I suppose.
Yeah, well, sort of what a lot of people would.
Non-essentials.
Yeah, the government class them as non-essentials, but the general populace class them as essentials. So, yeah.
I think one of the latest ones is the sugar tax, isn't it? That's about.
Yeah. And they've done that to say, it's because, we're healthy living. They put it under that, we're trying to reduce people's sugar intake, so we'll increase the tax so people won't buy it as much. In actual fact, it's actually got nothing to do with that. It's to do with the fact that the sugar plantations out there have actually suffered. Their crops have not been as fruitful. So it's actually to boost up their intake, to keep their profits still as high as they were. But in the 17th and 18th century, it actually included things like salt, leather and soap, which you would think were, not non-essentials. You'd think that those were quite essential. So this tax that was put on goods was raised, and it was raised quite considerably as well at the time. So it made things unaffordable for people, which encouraged people to smuggle, quite frankly.
Absolutely. And there was obviously like big companies or, even shops and stuff, they would employ people to go out in a gang and smuggle. So they could obviously get the stuff as cheap as they could and maximise the profit.
Yeah, I think that's one thing I was surprised at, was the extent, and it didn't just go down to like little groups. Like in my head, I sort of had it before I researched this. I had it as like a group of 10 people, and you know they were like completely secular and out, you know, it was a bad thing, you know. But actually, when we looked at this, it had people like funded investors in smuggling gangs, and every part of like the local community would be involved in this to some level or other, you know. And the gangs were huge, you know, absolutely huge, and the areas, you know, on our coastline. I mean, you've got to remember, England is quite a small country. We've got a lot of coastline. Yeah. And it's very prolific. Yes. It's very prolific, you know. And when you think about like the villages that are smattered along the coast back in the 18th, 17th, and 18th century, of course, you know, it's not as big towns as they are now, but these were very involved in this, you know, and it was huge deliveries of smuggling. We're not talking like a couple of barrels. It's extraordinary, in fact.
I mean, you're talking about actual ships sort of anchoring offshore and sort of like a ferry operation going backwards and forwards to actually unload the ships of all the contraband. And this would take, you know, time. Time,
resources. I mean, you've got the people to, you know, to transport it. I mean, it's not unheard of, and this is very general, for a trip, one trip, to bring in 3,000 gallons of spirits.
That's some party.
That is one heck of a party. Now, bearing in mind, if you equate that to today, to give everybody a mental image, that's roughly around 1,500 cases of brandy. Put that in your garage. That's a lot. That's a heck of a lot. I don't think my garage could handle that, actually.
Can you imagine what it says about the particular village that it was going to? I mean, they must have been, like, completely off their heads for the first, like, months on end.
You wouldn't be able to get the brandy in Kerry's garage because that's full of gin. So
talking of gin, that was so plentiful that there's a little folk story that they used. It was so plentiful that they used to use it to clean their windows with gin.
Yeah,
you can imagine the smell.
I can well imagine it.
You know, but also you've got to remember that spirits were usually above proof as well. So we're not talking like pink gin that you can bring in today. You know, this is strong stuff. This is incredibly strong stuff, and they would actually have to water it down. You know,
dilute it.
You know, dilute it down.
Decant it.
Because
dilute it.
I mean, if that's the case, it wouldn't take much for someone to prove that whole entire village is on the smuggling circuit. You just walk into it and go, whoa. They are complete.
Have you smelt their windows? They smell of gin.
Exactly. Their whole house smells of gin. They're definitely smugglers.
They're mother's ruin gin, by the way, you know. But, you know, I say that's just a folk story of...
I'm sure it ruined a lot more people than just mothers.
I'm sure it did. Yeah, I'm sure it did. But at the end of the day, gin back in the day was very, very cheap. We found this out through the Newgate show that we did, didn't we? They were all on gin. But the proof that was coming through from the smugglers was a very higher content of proof. It was very strong. But they didn't dilute it.
I think it was probably closer to the paint stripper today and the stuff they were getting in. Yeah.
Exactly.
I think that's why they had just the black lead on their windows, because it just melted the paint away.
Quite possibly. And it's also been said that 4/5 of all the tea drunk around this time was actually contraband. It wasn't actually, but no one had paid duties on the tea that was coming through legally. So tea was a big thing as well. But we are, the UK as a whole, are massive tea drinkers, right?
Yes, definitely.
She says with a cup of tea in her hand right now.
Well, you especially, Kerry. Yeah, I think you keep the tea industry going down your way quite well.
So far we've learnt about me that I've kept the chocolate trade, the tea trade, and the gin trade in.
Yes, well, there you go. Supply and demand.
That's it, exactly.
Now, this was all to do with sailing ships that brought the goods over from the continent. So we're not talking just like, this is one of the things that I quickly learned, that the infrastructure, shall we say, for smuggling was not what, again, we've got a very twisted image. There's a difference between the proper smuggling trade and wreckers.
That's right, yeah.
So this is not things that just happen to turn up on the coast. This is an organised institution where it wouldn't just be English. There'll be communications with the ports abroad and the captains abroad and foreign, even people we were at war with, captains we would be in contact with, and as a smuggler, this is
because this business overrided everything else. Yes, and you would sort of like talk to people and do business with people who you're at war with, because at the end of the day, business is business. Simple as.
Multicultural UK is not a new thing.
Nope.
Is what I would say on that one. Quite often you're going to hear, if you went to the marketplace, you wouldn't just be hearing from like the British people, you'd be hearing like the Danish, you'd be hearing French, you'd be hearing quite a lot of maybe even Spanish at times, depending on the period of history that you're looking at.
Particularly Flemish, Dutch would have been huge, especially in our neck of the woods in the east of the country. Yeah, huge populations over here.
Yeah, and there are some ports that actually have their roots abroad. This is along that coastline of smuggler trade. Some small ports that they were back in the day are now big ports. But when you look at what was coming from, coming through, they used the smaller ports, but they became big ports because of the trade that was going through them. So big ports that we see nowadays, like Boulogne. And there was another one as well, I can't remember the bloody name of it now. But big ports that we know of now initially started off as small trading ports based basically in the smuggling trade.
So they would have had their foundations laid and their sort of financial capital was born off the back of smuggling.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to look at, we're going to have a look at this. We're going to break it down a little bit more for you guys to sort of give you a general... a general flavour, flavour being the operative word there, about what these smugglers did, because this is a massive trade that's going on under the eyes, under the radar of the customs and excise men, known as preventatives back in the day against the smugglers, the ones that were, trying to police the coast. They were known as preventatives. And so that this is all going on, and I would say under the eye of, because a lot of those people were bribed to keep their mouths shut because of the scale of the operation. And when you start looking at what's being brought in under the smugglers' trade, it is, I would say, probably quite hard to police, because there's only one or two people trying to police that, and these smuggler gangs are absolutely enormous when we start getting into that side of things. So, I mean, to show you the level of the community level, when the Scilly Isles was basically totally reliant on smuggling for survival. That's one of, just one little island. And they were brought, when the preventative measures were stepped up in that area to prevent smuggling, it actually brought them to the point of starvation.
Yeah.
So
believe it.
Whole communities would rely on the smuggling trade to survive.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
There we go. So that gives you a little idea. Now, there are times in the Shetland Islands and around Falmouth where every penny was spent on contraband. Wasn't actually going into the coffers of any form of excise. They lived off all the booty, shall we say, and that was coming in smugglers.
The map of the exchequer of the UK at the time must have had some very big holes in it when nothing was generated at all.
You can imagine them sitting there going, everyone's sitting there drinking tea, and I'm only earning like this amount from it.
Yeah.
Hold on, what's going on?
Well, that's it. And then they pay a visit to the town and go, whoa, this gin smells really powerful.
Yeah. The tax on tea was actually 70% of its initial cost. That's a massive markup.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about it in terms like that, then you can understand why they were smuggling, because you can, you buy it for, £3, and then you have to buy it normally, under normal circumstances for £10.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That is a massive difference. So even if you smuggled it in and it still cost you £3 to buy in initially, and you sold it for £5, that's still not a bad little markup on that. And you're undercutting the market brilliantly there, aren't you? That's...
Well, because that makes your customers happy. They're getting a cheaper product, but the smugglers that are smuggling it in are also making a profit on top of it. So happy days.
Yeah, and tradesmen who are buying contraband, they're buying it for like £5 and selling it for 10. That's well big profits in their little pocket.
Yeah.
So you can understand why this became such a big area for people. And as I say, you've got to remember, this is a completely different, situation to wrecking. That is not what this is. This is an organised infrastructure of people bringing illicit goods into the country to avoid taxations.
Yeah.
And that is it.
It's purposeful. Yeah.
It makes you wonder who the bigger criminals are, doesn't
it? Yeah, it certainly does. Now, William Pitt, the Prime Minister, the younger one, obviously, in 1784, suggested that of the £13 million of weight of tea consumed in Britain, only 5.5 billion had actually been bought in legally. Gives you kind of an idea of the extent of this. Now, smuggling gangs. Let's talk about gangs. They were around 50 to 100 people, roughly. 50 to 100 people. That's like on the lower level.
Yeah. This would have involved everyone, because I quite like and they would have had specific tasks as well. I mean, sort of like just reading the notes here. I mean, you would have had the spotsman who would have actually, his job was to direct the ship towards shore. So they would have had to have knowledge of navigation and stuff like that, and know sort of where the shallows were and everything. And then you'll have the ladderman who would arrange for the unloading of the cargo. And then you have the tubsman, who would actually, I think that speaks for itself, would ferry the cargo backwards to the actual beach or wherever. And then, this is my favourite, you'll have the batsman, who are there to protect the tubsman.
Yeah. So you've got, like you said, you've got the spotsman. Now, the spotsman wouldn't just have been there to, watch for the ship. They would have been involved in actually organising the ship. So they're the ones who are going and talking to the captains of the ships and organising the cargo, and then watching, organising when it was going to come into the country, and then watching for it and where it was going to land and the time it was going to land and all that side of it. So it's a bigger picture than just watching from the shore for a ship. There's a lot more gone in the back. The lander, arranging the unloading of the cargo. Now, that's organising all the boats, how it's going to get from the ship to the shore. Yeah. That's a big operation when you're looking at massive cargoes.
Well, yeah, it's sort of like, imports today. I mean, that is a job in itself to, organise the unloading of ships and stuff, because it is done in a particular way as well.
See, I mean, the spotsman, for example, it's not far to imagine that they could just wreck the ship and turn themselves into wreckers to cut out the middleman, because then they could skip the bloke unloading the cargo and just pick it up off the beach.
Ships were a very valuable and commodity, and you wouldn't want to purposely wreck a ship, because then you're sort of cutting your nose off to spite your face, because that is part of your sort of transport network.
See, this is where the government could have got sneaky. They could have put their spotsman in. They could have put their government officials in as a spotsman, made the ships run aground, and then it cancels out their.
But there's a responsibility there, isn't there? If you want to continue your trade, you don't want to be wrecking the ships. It's it's a ferrying back and forth scenario. I wouldn't have. I can. I mean, although, but no, I think this is an organised operation that is, beyond wrecking. I think wrecking was more opportunistic.
Yeah.
I think if a ship did wreck, it was known that
it was just a rubbish spotsman.
Yeah, it was illegal. It was illegal to own any goods if there was one member of the crew still alive. So that was opportunistic. If a shipwreck.
But although people did have their own individual jobs, the whole gang would look out still for HM Customs.
Of course they did. Tubsman.
None of them wanted to be caught.
No, gosh, no. There was huge, legal implications on this. Smuggling was a massive problem, and they were very harsh in regards to punishment of these. You know, if you was a smuggler, you got hung. End of.
Well, yeah.
You know, so a tubsman carried the goods. Now you're looking at massive bales. You're looking at massive, like, barrels, and, you know, we'll go into that in a bit. And so you need a lot of people to carry these, you know. And a batsman, you need protection. These are nasty. These are nasty people as well. These are hard men and women, I would say. Now, the actual coastline...
Oh, yeah, because I don't think the women are too innocent in all this.
Oh,
No.
of course we are.
They're the masterminds behind it.
Probably.
Yeah,
They're like, oh, I need some nail varnish. Smuggle me in some.
Yeah, they're nagging the husbands, right, go out and do some smuggling for me. Yeah.
Smuggle yourself some dinner.
Oh, my God, you do. Preventative officers actually got divided into 33 areas around the coastline. So, and there would only be like 2 or 3 of these per area. So you've got like 33 areas that the country's coastline is split up into, and only 2 or 3. So you can imagine how difficult it was. And their whole job was just to prevent smuggling or catch the smugglers. So, I mean, that's a task.
I wouldn't envy that job.
No, that's not a job you would really want, is it, Paul?
No, definitely not.
No.
Just take the pay off the smugglers would give you to look the other way. Easy.
I'd be one of the investors, and they'd be smuggling for me.
Yeah, it sounds about right. Obviously, there's insufficient officers to patrol the whole of the coastline. So you can understand how easy it was for smugglers, really. I mean, they were wary of the preventatives, but, you know, relatively speaking, they're not much of a threat.
No, they're just a bit of a mild nuisance, you know. The preventatives will probably show up on the cliff top sort of far away and sort of just have a nose and think, you know, that's too big for us, let's go. You know, it's just, yeah.
I suppose if they got forewarned of a big shipment coming in, they could then call, like, the army in and, you know, like the military, should I say, in. But that was very rare because people wouldn't testify against the gangs because they were so scared of them, basically. So scared. Or they were too involved in the process.
They might have needed them.
Yeah, well,
they might have them well.
Yeah.
Especially landing the goods and stuff, because that would have been the responsibility of the towns or the sort of ports and little villages along the coast. And if there's 100 people or more involved, that's the whole village.
Yeah, that's exactly it, isn't it? And you know, you've got sea smugglers, so you've got the fishermen and the tubs that carried it backwards and forwards to the ships. You've got the land smugglers, so that's the local community who've transporting the goods. Because once you've got this massive shipment coming, you've got to get rid of it. So you've got to, you know, get it out into the communities and people to buy it, to the tradesmen, to the investors. You know, so you've got the land smugglers, and then you've got the foreign smugglers, obviously from the abroad that are helping to do this thing. So there's a lot of people involved in this, and we keep saying that. I want to keep defining that, because it was a big business. Now,
definitely.
Let's have a look at the contraband, because I love some of these things. The contraband was clearly defined regarding the packaging because of how it's got to be transported. It's got to be able to be carried or put onto the back of horses to move it. So when you're looking at tobacco, now obviously it's got a chance of getting wet. You don't want it to get wet. So it was wrapped in oilskin, you know, barrels of brandy, you know, floated. So if they did get caught by the cousins' men, they could just chuck it over the shore, you know, so the oilskin and the barrels themselves would be protected so they could then go back later and pick it back up again. But this is, again, where wrecking and smuggling gets confused, because if they get caught by the customs or a ship out, you know, that would be patrolling the straits, as it were, then they would offload their cargo. If that got washed up, that's fair game for the locals.
Yeah, that's just, the local pickers would be, you know, your sort of beach combs and stuff, because what you've got to remember, back in those times, these more of the inland communities were very poor, and they would have gone down to the coast just to subsist on, just to, you know, sort of just see what they could actually find and use for themselves. So, beach combing was a very popular sort of thing to do, to supplement to supplement your diet or income, even.
So concealment on the ship became a big a big thing too. So they used to do false bottoms on barrels because barrel dipping became another thing from the excise people to check the depth of the barrel when they caught on to that. That's what the smugglers were doing, were false bottoms in barrels. They started dipping into the barrels, a bit like oil when you check your oil these days in a car.
Yeah, the old dipstick, put it in, yeah.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Tobacco was actually woven into ropes, so it was like hidden in plain sight.
Oh, right, yeah. I didn't. Yeah, that makes sense. And I suppose it would have made good rope. Well, they make rope out of hemp, and that's sort of like a leaf, isn't it? So, yeah, you can understand that.
Hidden in plain sight. And so they employed all sorts of different methods to like hide and conceal the contraband on board, so they didn't have to offload it. But if they did, then it floated. So again, win-win situation, really. And if it's not found on the ship, so say you're being approached by a customs man. This is honestly, when you start looking, you can understand why some of the laws that are in now that back from these days. If they approached a ship and they started offloading stock. Yeah, so like they're approaching from one side and all the contraband's going off the other side of the stock, it's floating. Because it's not found on their ship, they can't prove that it was that ship that it was on.
Right, I see.
Yeah, so they can't get done for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right?
Makes sense, yeah. They need evidence, yeah. Even back then, yeah, it's the evidence, isn't it? And, if it's all just floating around, you can say, well, it was here when we got here.
Exactly. Yeah. So obviously, the customs men are going... Really, that's a lie. But they can't prove that it came.
That's handy.
Ship. Yeah. So this is why they started employing. But a lot of smuggling goods got lost in that way. So that's why they started employing other security measures to conceal it on the ship, because they don't want to be getting rid of their stock over the edge, because it's less profits, right? So. Yeah. Starting to get an idea of how big an operation this is. Now, it was so well organised. There were several landing areas. They didn't go, right. It was like the best at the moment. So you've got a ship coming over. It's due over on, I don't know, tomorrow. We've got a ship that's due to come over tomorrow. They've got several different areas that ship could come and land the goods, as it were. Mm-hmm. On the day... They then look at, okay, where's the customs officers and, where's the best place to land this, which is where your watcher and signalling comes in to finalise the drop.
Right.
To create less problems for the gang, basically. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense, yeah. So there's, and you're thinking of they didn't have radios or anything like that. So there's a fair bit of communication network going on, ship to shore and stuff like that with the rudimentary stuff. So yeah, these are skilled people that are doing this.
Yeah, of course they are. Sailors were very skilled back in those days, and without the technology that we've got nowadays. Now the boat was always black. Famous Pirate of the Caribbean moment here, the Black Pearl. Black ship, black sails, and they were used for smuggling. They can travel and not be seen on the sea. So again, they're avoiding the navy that was going up and down and policing the channel.
Yeah.
So that's what and they were used to signal using a lamp, like an old-fashioned lamp, or a lock and flint, a spout lamp, and even during the day they would come in. It wouldn't always be a nighttime thing. They could do this during the day, and they would actually use old smoke signals.
Oh, right, yeah, light a fire, yeah, a beacon, yeah. On the headland.
Yeah, they used to use gorse because it created the most smoke.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why that wasn't a favoured use in homes for tinder.
Oh, right.
Because it created too much smoke.
Okay.
Ah, so a little interesting fact you learn, isn't it? Little interesting fact you learn.
Yeah.
Oh, dear. Now, obviously, getting it up onto the beach was a thing. So they would use tugboats to shuttle back and forth. Now, depending on the depth of the boat, how big the keel was on the boat would depend on how far in they would come. So if it was like a shallowed bottomed boat, like a tub, they could get into like the shallows, as it were, but then they'd have to walk into the water to get the goods out. And this is where the tubsmen come in, and then they get loaded up, and then they get to the beach, right? Or they would have something called a kelp cart.
A kelp cart was seaweed?
Yeah.
Mm.
A kelp cart was flat-bottomed.
Ah.
Right? And then they could drive that straight up onto the sands. And obviously, kelp, good way of hiding the contraband as well.
Just cover it up.
Cover it over with kelp.
Yeah, because they would have used the seaweed, I think, for fertilisers and stuff on the land, wasn't it? It was quite common.
Yeah, all sorts of things. In Ireland, they used to eat it as well, didn't they?
Mm.
So, you know, those kinds of things were used. And horses, obviously, were very commonly used, and donkeys and stuff like that. Now, the tubmans actually carried 2 kegs each. Now, they're about £45 each.
Cheap, isn't it?
No. Wait.
In weight.
I know, £45 is in weight.
They would carry 2 of them. Yeah.
One on the chest and one on the back.
Because a barrel is not a particularly sort of, ergonomically sort of designed thing to carry, is it?
No, but some of the designs of the barrels are interesting. It's another little interesting fact for you. Things you find out.
Okay, off you go.
They would actually, rather than being round, they'd have one side that was flat.
Oh, I see.
So it was sort of like not massively, but enough to make it easier to carry.
So those smuggler barrels.
Barrels, exactly.
It's a bit worrying, Paul. She does know a lot about this, doesn't she? I mean,
does,
and she does live on an island.
Yeah,
it makes you wonder what she gets up to.
It does make you wonder what I get up to in my spare time. Now, these were heavy, obviously.
You have got Dead Man's Cove near you, haven't you?
I do.
Yeah, I think maybe that might be one of those towels to keep you away, I think.
Yeah.
So that's where
Kerry's always going on about it when we visit her, so yeah.
I think that's where she brings all her contraband in.
Oh, Dead Man's Cove is actually to do with the dead bodies that were found in the Thames. They tended to wash up there, and if they couldn't find the body in the Thames, then they'd have a look around there, and that's usually where the tide would drop it off, as it were.
and that's what she tells everybody.
Yeah, and that's what she tells everyone, yeah.
Oh, dear. Now, you've got to, thinking about this, going back to the tubsmen, guys, keep on topic. Right. Going back to the tubsmen, if you're climbing up a cliff face, they do it on rope ladders, and they're climbing up rope ladders with barrels on their front and their chest.
Yeah.
On their chest and their back.
There must be someone coming.
I don't think I could even climb a rope ladder without a barrel.
Rope ladders aren't the easiest things to climb.
No.
Trust me.
They're not, are they? Now, the batsmen were obviously the protectors of the tubsmen. Bless them, they're the violent ones. I think they're all pretty violent, to be fair. But the actual this is like the origins of the protection racket. Is where this comes from. They would use either a stout oak club, a flail, or handguns. You remember the old, stand and deliver type guns.
Yeah. Yeah, the old, the flintlock pistols and things like that, yeah.
And they would have 2 rows of these standing sort of like in like a corridor. Think of it like a corridor of these batsmen at strategic points to protect the cargo. Not so much the batsmen, the tubsmen. It's the contraband they're protecting. Let's not fool ourselves into thinking they're protecting their men. It's the contraband that they're protecting on this one. And they didn't care. They just did not care who they killed or who they took out.
Because the product is more valuable than the person, because the people are expendable. Yeah,
exactly. Well, yeah, unfortunately, that's the true story there, isn't it? People are expendable. Now, the horses are a massive commodity, and they would get these from the local farmers. Sometimes, if the farmers didn't cooperate, they would be intimidated into cooperation. Remember, for a farmer, their horses are a valuable commodity for day-to-day use. They don't want their horses overused or winded from a night's, foray into the smuggling. So not all farmers would be happily borrow my horses. You know what I mean? They were intimidated into it, and if they didn't, then intimidation was used. Like I say, this is the birth of protection rackets.
Yeah.
Basically, roadside ambushes, haystack fires, livestock suddenly getting ill, like sheep, all of a sudden coming downhill, all those sort of things.
Think, oh, lend us your horses, or there might be an accident that might happen. Yeah.
Now, storage of contraband is a thing as well, and what you have to do is think, right, my first initial image of smuggling was they'd put it in a handy cave.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
That's in all the books.
All the books got to be put into a cave. But when I looked into this, there are tales of this. There are places that are said to be, smuggler caves. I think we can all think of several places where it's supposed to be a smuggler cave. Some people have even built the tourist trade on the fact that it was a smuggler's cave. Not necessarily, because if you think about it, a lot of caves are tidal. So you've got to think about keeping your contraband dry. You've gone to all this trouble so far, of keeping it dry and getting it to land. The last thing you want to do is put it in a cave that floods on the next tide and that sweeps your contraband out or gets it wet, or with the tide and the flow of the water is going to smash your contraband against the wall and maybe break the barrels or, ruin the sacking it comes in. So caves were temporary hiding spots.
Yeah, they must. Plus, everyone would have known where they're too static, because part of the art of the smuggling was to keep the goods moving, so you wouldn't have actually kept them in caves for very long. And plus, the excise men would have known where all the caves are and stuff, so they wouldn't have been that sort of secret hiding places. You would have possibly have had to be a bit more imaginative and move and try and get the goods as inland as quickly as possible and then disperse them.
It is. It's about moving that stock as quickly as possible, avoiding, detection, and getting the money back for your next smuggling run. That's the drive. But some caves, I was looking around at some of these caves, and Devon obviously being the main area for this. Now, Ilfracombe, called Samson Caves. Now, it's said to have gotten its name from an infamous smuggler that used it as a storehouse. But it was written about in the 1850s in a book called The Call of the Chambercombe, and that's really where the story comes from. It's quite doubtful that they would, but this is a great smuggler's tale, isn't it? Anybody who's got something like that, it's just one of those things.
Yeah. I mean, you can see why they make good stories, though. I mean, it has everything, the smuggler, the romance of it all. It just conjures up a whole image. And I think for authors of the time and since, it's just been a good staple of a novel if you're writing about that sort of thing.
Paul?
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. But they were used, when we talk about it, the other thing that you hear about smugglers is smuggler tunnels, not just caves, but they would excavate tunnels. I mean, how true this is, I couldn't find much verified information about proper tunnels that have been found. There's lots of talk about them, but there's very little verified information about those.
I don't think that smugglers tended to tunnel themselves. No. I think they used the natural tunnels that would form like in chalk cliffs and things to even just stash their stock for a little while, just in case there was someone coming or something,
Tales of tunnels are very sort of common, and even sort of just stepping away, around castles and sort of stuff like this. I think these were sort of may have been introduced as a ruse again, to sort of throw people off the scent, to sort of like, there's a tunnel and stuff like that. I think there may be a lot of that in these sort of stories of tunnels.
There's the True Crimes Museum down in Hastings. Obviously, they're right on the coast, and the actual museum is set in chalk cliff caves. And there is obviously rumours that they were used by smugglers. Now, I personally think that because they're not that far deep into the cliffs, that it would just be a case of it's somewhere that they can stash their goods to send them out to different places. So there's like a cache. So they've got like a little stash of stuff. So when someone needed it, it was like, okay, well, I'll nip down the local cave and get it.
Maybe, who knows?
But I don't think they tunnelled it out. I just think it's a natural cliff. A natural cave.
But I think the amount of people that are involved in the smuggling, like huge, like the whole community, they would have just dispersed the goods throughout the community within their houses and stuff, outhouses and stuff like that, because there's no way two excise men could actually go for a whole sort of. They may have found little stashes in people's barns and stuff, but I think the art was to disperse it amongst the community.
To be fair, I don't think they needed to go through people's houses. They just sniffed the windows.
Yeah. This is true. Now, I think, having looked at this, I don't think caves and tunnels were particularly well used. No. I couldn't find any verified information on this, although there's a lot of rumour and a lot of tales about, caves and stuff. I mean, you think of tin mines, I think that's more likely to have been used if that's, going through the tin mines or stashing it in certain areas of the tin mines. Very poor trade back in the day. You've got, farmers' barns, hay barns that they could easily put things. I've even heard of them using a dung heap to hide the contraband in. Cellars of the local inn, that's where pubs come into this, the local taverns and stuff would come through, that sort of thing. So whether or not they would initially split the stash, I don't know, or whether or not they would maybe drop to various points once they got it on board, on land, would be, I mean, when you start looking at it, in 1785, a 96-gallon cask of rum was found at Watermouth Cove, but it was on the cove, not in a cave. In 1801, 224 gallons of gin and 164 gallons of brandy were found on the foreshore. They used to use the moving sand, like if it was a sandy sand dunes, they would stash it and cover it. Very hard to detect the sands shift all the time, so it's very hard to detect it. And when you've got like some of the people that were involved in this, you think a smuggler from North Devon, Thomas Benson, in 1747 actually became an MP for Barnstaple.
The crooked MP.
Yeah. So when you start thinking about
that's very unlikely, isn't it? I mean, politicians being crooks. You don't hear of that anywhere, do you?
He was actually granted a lease on Lundy to basically carry convicts, but he actually landed them on Lundy instead to run his smuggling operation.
Cool. You get paid by the government to transport them, then oh dear. An entrepreneur there, I think we've got.
Well, he did become overconfident and was fined for smuggling and stripped of his office. He didn't pay, and his lands in Bideford was seized. And then, to recover his losses, he persuaded the captain of the Nightingale to fire it, set fire to his ship, for insurance. But that plan was discovered, and he actually had to go to Portugal. But he was actually tried and executed in 1754 for his wrongdoings. So although how hard you fall, do you know what I mean? How hard you rise, and how fast you, what's the saying? How fast you rise is you fall
the harder you fall.
Yeah. The harder you fall.
I know what you're trying to say.
Yeah, that little saying on that one. Now, St Clement's Caves in Hastings is actually believed to be partially naturally formed caves, and is as a result of the sand mining. And although they are built as smugglers' caves, there's actually no record of them being used as such. Now, St Clement's Caves is actually known as Smugglers' Adventure. So they've actually built this is what I mean, they built a whole tourist attraction off the back of it. But there's no record of them being used. And it's been used as hospitals, air raid shelters, ballrooms, music venues, all that sort of thing, but nothing smuggling.
No, isn't it
a bit like Black Gang Chine down on the Isle of Wight?
Yeah,
they've sort of built that whole theme park thing on the basis of smugglers.
Yeah.
That makes a good story, doesn't it?
And dinosaurs.
Yeah, and dinosaurs. And crooked houses.
Yeah,
and it's all falling into the sea at the moment. So
it is, yeah.
if you get a chance to go to the Isle of Wight, go and visit it before it has disappeared.
No, they just move it back every year. What they lose in land, they move back. So, yeah. Whenever you go, because I've been there a few times, you go, there's lots of places that are like cordoned off because it's like obviously subsided into the sea. And all they do is move it back. Which is really funny, really. Expensive.
I was going to say, they can't move it all back. They'd have to move it out to the sides, I would have thought. As opposed to moving it back. Because you can't move a road.
Well, it's getting closer and closer to the road. They're all right at the moment, but it's getting closer to the main road that runs the coast there. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with Black Gang Chine. I'd imagine there's probably a heck of a lot of underpinning going on. And protecting the coastline. A bit of work going on in that way. Now let's talk about, because this wasn't just like the south coast. This went on all around Ireland, as I say, all of our coastlines, even Scotland. So let's have a look at Colzine Castle and Caves, Paul.
Yeah, okay. Well, where's that on the research?
Underneath.
I'm lost. Caves. I'm lost on that.
Right.
There's lots of it.
Well, I did a thorough job, is all I'm saying.
Okay. Right. What one? Colzine Castle.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Oh dear. Yeah. Apparently, there was a lot of smuggling going on in that area, and it's quite close to the Isle of Man. Where obviously taxis were much lower. So, mind you, would they want? I don't know why they done smuggling there. If all their taxis were lower.
Well, traditionally, the Isle of Man, and even today, it's always been classed as a bit of a tax haven. But probably easier just to get the the contraband in on the Isle of Man.
But they obviously didn't they smuggle tobacco, tea, and brandy as well. And it was very prevalent there. They smoked a lot.
This is one place where they have got tunnels, and very well looked into tunnels as well. The archaeology is still going on there to find, things that are, why the tunnels were there. They still don't know. They assume it's smuggling. They think it's smuggling, but they also think that the tunnels are older than that. So there's still a lot of archaeology going on there as well. And there's this haunted tale. Gotta love this. This brings us into some mythologies as well regarding smuggling. Is that there's a tale of a piper that went into the caves but never returned, and some swear that they can still hear the playing of the pipe around the area.
What sort of pipes was it? Are we talking like bagpipes?
Yeah, piper. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So basically, they're saying a Scotsman went into the cave where there's lots of brandy and whiskey and never come out.
Bagpipes are totally sort of.
That sounds a bit iffy to me.
Wow.
They are actually an English an instrument originally.
What?
Okay.
Bagpipes?
Yes. Pipes, yeah.
Well, I never.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a Scots maiden famous.
But they
Northumberland pipes, sort of like the north of England, pipes, Irish pipes, it's an instrument, it was quite widely used. But I sort of saw this part of the research earlier, and I sort of went off on a side note and done a bit of research because it actually sort of triggered something, and I think the connection of sort of ghosts playing instruments, it does sort of ring true, especially around coastal areas, and there is quite a few stories of this, and it's not that much of a stretch of the imagination to sort of say that these smugglers sort of spread these rumours of a ghostly piper or a drummer or something like that because they could replicate it at night.
Yeah, because they could have one of their people drumming.
Yeah, playing a pipe. All those people are getting a bit close. Get the pipe going. And they'll go running. I mean, it's this is quite common practice.
Yeah, you've got to remember also that they're going to buy into the local legend to keep anybody they don't want away. So anybody that isn't involved in this operation, they don't want them snooping around. So they're very superstitious, very religious people back in this time. So if you spread a superstition or you buy into the local folklore, then it's going to keep people away. Like going back to the witches' curses, going back to black dog sightings, particularly on the Devonshire coast and stuff like that. It's a massive thing. Also, in Norfolk, you've got that story. And when we get on later on, there's even a story of a white lady, which they've sort of worked out wasn't a ghost. She was actually had phosphorus draped onto her clothing, and she would walk to scare away people. So they would back up the folklore stories and the mythology of the area to keep people away. They don't want people... Oh, sorry, I didn't actually see that kind of moment. Do you know what I mean?
I see in your research that you've got one story that was recorded by Sir William Brereton.
Yeah.
Who travelled around Great Britain in the 1630s, and he made his way to Calzine. Because you're better at reading than I am, do you want to just read the quote you've got in there?
Okay, only one of his sons, servants and others took a candle and conducted us to the cave, where there is either a notable imposture or most strange and much to be admired footsteps and impressions which are here to be seen of men, children, dogs, connies, I don't know what connies are, and divers, other creatures. These here conceived to be spirits, and if there be no such thing but an elaborate practice to deceive, they do most impudently betray the truth. For one of this knight's sons and another Galloway gentleman affirmed unto me that all the footsteps have been put out and buried in sand overnight, and have been observed to be renewed the next morning.
So basically, in layman terms and bringing it up to modern date, what is actually said is busted.
Yeah, hashtag busted. Yeah, I think so. But that is still a massive project that's ongoing. A massive, beautiful place. When you look at it, I was thinking, hashtag road trip, but it's a bit far.
Oh, where is it?
Ayrshire.
Yeah, right out of the wilds of Scotland there, me dear.
I did tell you it was a bit far away for a road trip, but it does. When you look at it online, it is absolutely really beautiful.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah, it is absolutely fantastic to look at, and you can visit the castle, obviously, when we all come out of lockdown. So you'll have to keep an eye out for that one, for when it reopens. Okay? Another one that archaeologically backs up a coastline is Dutchman's Cove, which is in Baltimore in Ireland. Now, in the caves, the rocks, you can actually see niches where candles and lanterns were used to signal pirates or smugglers at night time. And there is another staircase at the Cocaine Point that's located at the headline, which leads to a subterranean cavern with a waterway which boats could enter. So this is like where the mythology builds up of a boat enters a cave rather than anything else, and leaves it. So, it is being researched by archaeological proof.
There are places like this that exist, but they're very few and far between. And I think it's sort of like the novelists and the romantics all like expand it and sort of it is quite a quaint little thing if you look at it, sort of, and if you read it like that, isn't it? And it's no stretch of the imagination to see it to jump that these sort of little inlets and subterranean tunnels are everywhere. Yeah, which are quite clearly not.
No, not to the extent that we have that mental image of. It was mostly coming up onto shores than into caves or whatever. Well, it would have
been easier just to land it on the beach. I mean, people aren't stupid, they're practical. They are going to choose the easiest way to get contraband off a ship and onto shore, and that is to offload it directly onto the beach.
And most caves aren't very big. And if you think about the operation of some of these, that's going on, like... when we come on to the next segment of the show, we're going to be talking about a particular gang. And when you think about the amount of people, how many people can you fit in a cave? Let's be fair.
Going back to what you were saying about the quote, looking in where it says about conies. Mm-hmm. Coney could refer to places, people, animals, food, or ships.
Oh, it could refer to anything then.
Yeah.
So yeah, it could. He could be referring. I mean, because he says conies and divers.
Yeah.
So I should imagine in that respect he's talking about a ship, possibly.
Yeah, maybe,
it's probably little boats, little skiffs, or conies and dive. Yeah, it does sound like it.
It certainly. Yeah, you could well be right.
I got my research onto that one.
Did you?
Yeah.
Excellent. Love a bit of research going on in the background. Anyway, on that note, we've actually come to the end of the first segment of the show. Join us after the break and we will continue with our little look into smuggling.
Hello, Harry Price here. If there's nothing me and my friends enjoy more here on the other side, it is to sit back and relax and listen to the Paranormal Concept Show, right here on the PAUK Radio Network. Broadcasting a plethora of interesting and informative content for all your paranormal needs. Find them across social media to keep up to date with forthcoming shows and all their other adventures. Hello, is there anybody there?
Hello, and we're back in the room. We're going to be carrying on with the Hawkhurst gang. Is that?
That's right.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. They just didn't spell it right. Maybe they were illiterate.
Well, the first reference to this gang was actually called the Hoist Ginge, which was in a letter to John Collier in 1735. But basically, it's the Hawkhurst gang, which was a massive gang over in Kent. It's the Romney Marsh area. So we're talking about.
Yeah, I've actually been to Romney Marsh. It's quite a good area. Yeah, it's quite a nice place. Nice chip shop to sit and eat fish and chips.
No, trust you, boy. Good cod, and no doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. Really nice cod down there. Yeah, maybe that's where they smuggled cod. I don't know.
You never know.
No, they might have done. Yeah. So, but yeah, so this was a gang in around 1740, and I think they operated at Silver Hill, which is Hurst Green and Roberts Bridge. Mm-hmm. I think that's right. And apparently there was a HM revenue officer around there as well. That I think he was like one of those Officer Dibble type people, and it's like, oh, you know, when they was out, it's like, oh, not again. But yeah, this revenue officer was
paranormal coaching.
Got that right then. Yeah, his name was Thomas Carswell, and apparently he was shot by some of the smugglers.
He was. Yeah.
Well, he must have been shot by one of the smugglers, but maybe they all took pot shots and missed.
Not very accurate shooting back in those days, but he was shot and killed whilst trying to apprehend some of the smugglers. Now, one of the smugglers, George Chapman, was actually gibbeted in his home village on Hurst Green following this incident.
And incidentally, me and Richard have been and seen a real-life gibbet post.
Yes, you have, haven't you?
Yeah.
And actually, if you want to know more about gibbeting, then you need to go and listen to our show on hangings, on the gallows.
Yeah, and I do believe, haven't we got a blog about it as well?
Yeah, we
If
do.
we haven't, we should have, Richard.
Okay.
But take a look at our website anyway. All the shows, past shows, and blogs are on there, and it's paranormalconcept.com. Just thought I'd get that in there this week.
Yeah, that's good. Now, this was a massive gang. We're talking like 500 mounted men and armed men within an hour for a smuggling run. So this is like a well-oiled precision machine of smuggling operations, I would say, if you can get that many men going in a very short space of time. And they were very notorious. They were very, very violent in the local area. They were very, very powerful in their own right. This is one the customs would have been wanting to take down, I would have thought. They didn't care who they came up across, who they killed, they just didn't care. You know, they were really, I would say they probably were a 500 gang kind of strength, craze, twins scenario. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I mean, they were...
Area.
they were quite brazen. I mean, like in 1744, it's recorded that 3 large cutters laden with contraband sailed into Pevensey. The goods were loaded onto 500 waiting pack horses to be carried inland for distribution. So for an operation, I mean, that big, you would have really had to be very brazen and not care.
Yeah. I mean, that's massive. I mean, think 500 horses.
Yeah.
Just the horses. Forget the men that are handling the horses, but 500 horses for, carrying it. And 3 ships as well.
3 cutters, yeah.
Yeah, because they used to actually sort of subcontract some of their work out to other gangs. Like there's something here about the Wingham gangs who joined forces, and but they were doing an operation on Sandwich Bay, but they decided to leave prematurely with their horses.
For those obviously that don't know what a cutter ship looks like, isn't the Cutty Sark in Greenwich a cutter?
Yes, that's a T. Well, it's a clipper.
Yeah, a T.
Yeah, so you're looking at a ship roughly about that size.
Yeah, but when this gang actually decided to leave early, the Hankshaw gang actually set upon them. So there was a bit of a sword fight and duelling going on. So, there's definitely people not to be messed with. And if you did go into sort of like a contract with them and to help them out, you better be on your guard.
Yeah, you don't double-cross. There's no double-crossing scenarios going on here. Now, the Hawkhurst gang in that particular incident did win that. They took 40 horses belonging to the other gang. So
absolutely. I mean, going on a little bit into your research, but in 1746, the Hawkhurst group or gang teamed up with Wingham gangs.
Yeah, that's what we just
and obviously they joined forces to take off 11.5 tons of tea off of a ship. And obviously, it backfired a bit, and there was a bit of like arguing and warfare going on. But the sheer scale of them. I mean, 11.5 tons of tea.
It's the sheer scale of the operation. It's phenomenal when you think about it. I mean, and also, if they had got their contraband taken by the customs, they had no qualms about taking it back.
Oh, no. Yeah. They'll just go down to customs house, wouldn't they, and take it back, lay siege to the place.
Yeah, in 1748, one of the gangs brought a large cargo of brandy, tea and rum over. A customs cutter captured and seized the cargo, and the goods were stored in the customs house in Poole in Dorset. Now, some of the smugglers escaped, contacted the gang, who then went to the customs house and basically went, give us our stuff, right? They did. Yeah. They rescued their stuff. Obviously, the customs officers weren't very happy with this, offered a large reward for the recovery. So you could the wrangling going on. Do you know what I mean? Oh, we've just had our stuff nicked, mates. Right, where did they take it? They took it to Poole. So the gang go down to Poole, take it back. The customers are like, we're not having that, so we'll put out a big reward for this. Now, they did actually end up arresting a member of the gang, purely on informers.
This was from the Diamond gang, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, from one. His name was Diamond.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, one member of the gang, Diamond, was arrested and jailed at Chichester. So, this is a massive area you're talking about. Another member of the gang, Chater, was offered an alibi for Diamond, but unfortunately, while he was doing that, a customs officer named Galley was seen in a local pub by an informer and told the gang. The gang thought that Chater was informing on them, which he wasn't. So, oh, God, the couple... the gang then bought drinks for the couple they thought had informed on them, and they woke up being whipped, tied to a horse until they were nearly dead. So it was, you can imagine the whole shenanigans that went on.
That just sounds like an 18th century version of Facebook. He said, she said, then I went over and...
It does, doesn't it? It does. The gang thought that they had actually killed the customs officer Galley and buried him, but he wasn't dead. He was actually still alive. They kept Chater chained in a shed for a few more days and decided to kill him This is just absolutely crazy when you think about it. And in the end, what they did was they threw him down a well and then stoned him until he was dead. So,
yeah, just for good measure.
Yeah, just for good measure. Now, the bottom line is, I think that shows the brutality of this gang and the lengths they will go to protect their operations.
Because you're actually sort of starting to see a sort of like that. They operated in a big area.
Yeah.
Because you've got Sandwich in Kent, which is right sort of down the end, sort of right down the end of the south, and then up to Poole in Dorset and up to Chichester. That's a huge area.
Massive.
They held sway over.
Yeah, massive. But it was these two murders of the people that they thought were informers but weren't that actually started to turn the tide. They were previously looked on, the whole gang was previously looked at as almost like a Robin Hood kind of characters, steal from the rich to give to the poor kind of scenario. But because of the way that this particular situation worked out and the two innocent people that weren't informers got killed, it kind of started to turn the tide against the smugglers in regards to public opinion. So people started going, well, hang on, this has gone too far now. It's all well and good having cheap goods off them, but when you're starting to kill innocent people, it takes it a step too far. Yeah. Now, Arthur Gray, one of the smugglers, was actually executed for the murder of Thomas Carswell in 1748. So they didn't get away scot-free one person didn't get away scot-free. Talk about scapegoated there, I feel. Or
one out of 500, I suppose, yeah.
Mm-hmm. He would have been thrown under the bus if buses were invented then.
Exactly. He was actually hung for that. So, when you think about it, public opinion's starting to turn against the brutality of this particular gang. Now, there's a very famous battle that took place between villagers and the smuggling gang in particular, which is the Battle of Goudhurst. Goudhurst, is it said like that?
Goudhurst, yeah. As I say, it's not a battle in the traditional sense, but yeah, it would have been a sort of like a skirmish, but yeah.
Now, but the thing that's wrong with this is it was actually written 100 years after. So this is an oral tale that has been told for about 100 years, and then it finally got written down after the fact of, so 100 years later, it got written down by a guy called Robert Baker. Now, his story is that the village of Goudhurst was actually terrorised by the Hawkhurst gang. So they all got together, basically, and an old former soldier, one particular community member, William Sturt, persuaded them to basically defend themselves against the gang. Now, obviously, the gang heard about this and thought, we ain't having that. So threatened to actually attack the village and broil and eat the hearts of the defenders. Lovely. Lovely. Now, this happened actually on the 21st of April, around that date. They don't know the exact date, so this is quite relevant, really. We've only just passed that date, haven't we?
Well, yeah, not long past. A couple of weeks or so.
I know, not long past, so I don't know.
I don't know. I've lost track of days. It could be that day today, to be fair.
This is true. A number of the gang rode past the town, and there was an inn called the Goudhurst Inn, and they started just shooting at it, basically, because they were a bit, intimidating, trying to intimidate the villagers. But Sturt was already aware of this, so you can see there's an informer situation going on. All the gang's coming, quick, take position.
Yeah.
And he'd actually placed men as snipers in upstairs windows and the church tower, who returned fire. The gang went, "Oh my God, they're firing on us," and went, We just were doing this just to intimidate you. We weren't here in full, so we're going to go away again. But its leaders killed George Kingsmill and another smuggler named Willett. Right? Woohoo! Routed the smugglers.
Well, I think William Sturt must have been the saviour of the village. Definitely his military background would have come in handy there, because he has sort of thought about this, and certainly to place snipers in the church tower and stuff like that.
I think what really happened is, I've seen it on TV already, so it must be true. What actually happened? The gang surrounded the pub basically, and started shooting at it. and there was a bloke inside that said, "Hang on a minute, I'm just finishing my Weetabix." And they all looked at each other and said, "They've had their Weetabix," and run away.
Very funny, very funny.
And if you want to know about that, then you're going to have to go back and listen to last week's show. Now, it really portrays the villagers as being the goodies, doesn't it, this story? You know, overcoming the nasty, naughty smugglers, you know, and the protection racket that they've got going on.
There is a sense of that, isn't there? You know, sort of, you know, good triumphs over evil, isn't it?
But the head of the customs service in Kent, Mr. John Collier, in 1747, kind of doesn't really agree with this. He actually replied, "Some complaints have been made of their behaviour, which is not on the whole strictly justified." Effectively, Wood is informing Collier that villagers are acting as vigilantes and bounty hunters, and Collier is actually agreeing that they may have gone too far.
Oh, right.
I'll still go with the Weetabix.
Yeah, maybe so. Because the 1736 Indemnity Act and 1746 Smuggling Act actually offered huge rewards up for the smugglers, you know, for the conviction of wanted smugglers. So, if you want to earn money, one way of getting quite a nice bunce is to actually get a smuggler, you know.
Yeah.
Inform on a smuggler.
Yeah, like sort of like a bounty hunter, you know, and specialising in smugglers. Because what we've sort of found out so far, I mean, large communities, so everyone would have known who these people were. So there must have been a huge temptation to be shocked to the authorities for certain people, especially if these rewards were starting to be handed out.
Yeah. The village actually claimed £150 reward for the killing of Kingsmere and Woolard. So, did they provoke for a bounty? Is the question. That's on this one. It's a possibility.
Yeah. They lured them in.
Considering this was written 100 years after the event as well, that does sort of suggest that some of it could have actually been made up and just to fill in the gaps if there were any.
I mean, following that, in 1749, actually, 26 members of the gang were executed for smuggling, and that basically was a bit of a downturn for the smuggling gang in that area. It just sounds like things got out of hand and got nasty, and the customs, you know, were very on top of this. They really did sort of start putting pressure on, so it kind of was a little bit, it got a little bit out of hand, you know, when you start thinking about it.
Yeah, sort of like the high water mark.
Didn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it did. It made the 5 o'clock news in the afternoon.
Dong.
I wonder how that worked.
It was in the Kentish Post in 1747 on the 22nd of April. Shall I read it?
Yeah, go for it. Go on.
15 smugglers went to Goldhurst, all armed with pistols and something, and swore they would fire the town. The people, having notice of it, got all armed and received their first fire, but none were hurt. They fired at the smugglers and shot 2 through their heads, whereupon the others made off. Oh dear, the Kentish Post, that was, everybody, if you're interested, go and find that. So yeah, it was quite interesting. But again, because of the strength of the gang, there's loads of places that are connected to this particular gang in question, and a lot of legends surrounding it. None of them seem to back up. You know, I'm not saying the places weren't involved in the contraband movement or the gang themselves, but some of them, in regards to the paranormal perspective on it, you know, like ghost stories and things we go out looking for nowadays, don't seem to be backed up by the history. And that's the main problem, isn't it, with this?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is fascinating when you get a report back from a paranormal team and they've gone out and investigated it and come back with the same ghost story that was told by the smugglers. And it's like, well, they just told you that just to keep you away. So is it a case of them making the facts fit? if they get activity, that is.
Exactly. This is the problem I have with a lot of these stories. I mean, the Highgate House, not the one in London, but the one down in Hastings, was supposed to be a hiding place for contraband, and it's supposed to have, again, we've got tunnels linking it to different locations. On that, it's widely stated that the Oak and Ivy Inn was headquarters of the Hawkhurst gang, but the deeds of the pub don't bear this out. It was not licensed as an inn or alehouse before the mid-19th century, but the pub itself says the graffiti is still scrawled on the beams in the loft from the Hawkhurst gang. So where's the truth in that? You know, who knows, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
Overlaid and overlaid, you know, sort of people say, well, it's a pub now, it must have been a pub back then, and it just, everything gets lost, doesn't it, in translation, really, and, you know, it's, you know, the anecdotal story, which is sort of, you know, a lot of time, a lot of sort of paranormal investigation teams and stuff, and that's all they have to go on, isn't it?
Yeah, but when you start researching stuff like this, you can't find any, you know, very verified facts. It becomes very. It's just an account. It's just a story. You know, you can't take
that's
it.
As that. I mean, we've sort of encountered that at another location that we was trying to look into. The owners said that there's loads of history online about it, but we've actually looked into it, and the only history you can find is stated from the owners anyway.
Yeah.
And you can't actually trace any of that back further than, you know, what they've reported already. So, you know, where do these stories come from?
Well, you go to witness reports, but when you find the witness reports are really good friends with the people that are now touting the story, and there's no previous information, and when you start looking into the history of the location in regards to, you know, records and stuff like that, there's nothing, and you start to have to question it. You have to question that, you know.
Exactly, and I think that's where many investigators fall foul, because, you know, they do take it at face value. They do a quick Google search and go, oh yeah, that's the history, but they don't actually look at where that history information come from in the first place.
Yeah, you've got to, as your due diligence, you've got to try and trace it back to source.
Yeah.
Very much
and
so.
see if they're credible. Definitely.
You know, I mean, as hard as it is at times, but that is the role. If you want to call yourself an investigator, that is what an investigator does.
It is. Yeah. That is the point of it all, really. And, you know, we see it quite a lot. You know, we see this quite a lot. And in particularly, it came up very, very prevalent in regards to smuggling legends and tales. Yeah. You know, like I've said, the whole tourist industry has been built on smugglers' tales in around the coast. It's a very big pull for people. It's smugglers, you know what I mean? And that whole romanticised image we've got of smuggling, a whole tourist industry is built up, and there are tales and stories. And where do they come from, these stories? You have to look at the history to see if it backs it up. In regards to the Oak and Ivy, it doesn't bear out. What do I know? Do you know what I mean? I haven't gone up and looked at the beams that are on there. I don't know. I don't know what that pub was before it was a pub. It could have been it could have been anything. It could have just been a house that they used. You know, for all I know. But considering it was supposed to be the headquarters of the Hawkhurst gang, it doesn't kind of bear it out. But that's a whole different historical research that would have to be undertaken to find out if that is
because I've only heard that the deeds don't correspond with the time that the gang was around, so they couldn't possibly have used it as a HQ. It's almost like the whole legend of Robin Hood and the Robin Hood tree in Sherwood Forest. You go there looking at this massive big tree that's held up because it's so old that it's held up. But then if you take into consideration how old that tree is, it would have just been a little twig sticking out of the ground when Robert Locksley was around, you know, and it just couldn't possibly be used for what the legend says.
Yeah. And this is the thing, isn't it? Use your common sense. You know, the tree back then days was not going to be the tree you're looking at today.
No, definitely
because
not.
of growth. No. Do you know what I mean? I mean, this is another one. The Queen's Inn is supposed to be another place that was frequented by the Hawkhurst gang, and a pair of ghostly legs are sometimes seen from the chimney place. Protruding from the chimney place. And it's said, the ghost story of this one is that it belonged to a long-dead smuggler who suffocated whilst hiding from the customs. He didn't hide very well if his legs are protruding, right?
No. It's almost like playing hide and seek and having your feet poking out the curtains, isn't it?
And again, I have heard similar stories to that before from other sort of pubs and locations of, sort of people expiring in chimneys. They certainly would have been a hiding place, and perhaps people would have sort of tried to climb up them. But you can see where these stories come from.
Maybe it was the ghost of Dim Jim, and he hid there when the fire was lit.
Yeah, but I also think you're missing a whole section of history regarding chimneys and people going up chimneys in that respect.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, they used to use children to go and clear the chimneys. Chimney sweeps used to go up there. People used to do priest holes in chimney breasts. Do you know what I mean? There's a whole...
Well, that's it. I mean, when people were burgled, they used to send kids down chimneys and stuff like that to break in and then open the front door for the burglar.
I know, but because you've got this link with the Hawkhurst gang and it's very famous in that area, it's very easy to jump to that assumption.
Yeah.
It's a dead smuggler, who was suffocated whilst trying to hide from the customs officers. Do you know what I mean? I don't think that I don't know. What do I know, right?
Well, I mean, there is definitely other scenarios that it could have been that can explain the two legs in the chimney. But as you said, because it's attached to the Hawkhurst gang, that many people will jump to that conclusion. I mean, even if there's a paranormal investigation team going down there and using... like the ghost box, for example, they'll sit there and they might get a word through. They'll link it to the Hawkhurst gang as opposed to anything else.
Well, because you've got your template there to put it onto.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's it. I mean, another really famous inn in that area is the Mermaid Inn. Now, we, as a paranormal people, probably know the Mermaid Inn from Most Haunted. They investigated it in 2002. They only captured orbs, everybody, but they were there investigating it. Now, again, when you look into this, they were supposed to drink there, the Hawkhurst gang. Again, this was touted on the show. It's been, linked to that. And this is supposed to be quite an active place.
See, I mean, okay, they call orbs. That just means they've just got a dodgy cameraman.
It's quite dusty.
If he had the right cameras, he could have eliminated the orbs. They're not paranormal. I don't believe in them at all.
No, I know.
It's a camera phenomena, not a paranormal one.
I tend to agree with you on that point. But again, the Mermaid Inn itself...
mention all again,
just anything you want most. So I'm going to move on because a lot of the places we're talking about are Grade 2 listed buildings. They're very historical in their own right. Do you know what I mean? They look the part. They've got the history. They've got the age. They've got the feel. I mean, in regards to the Mermaid Inn, if you go into the actual bar itself, you can imagine the 1700s. You know what I mean? Because of the way the bar is, it's got that age to it. Do you know what I mean? So you can understand why ghost stories build up around these places. Now, Mermaid Inn doesn't actually say that any members of the gang haunt there, but they do say that the ghost of a woman that's supposed to be there is supposed to be the wife of one of the Hawkhurst gang members, Mr. George Gray. Whether that's true or not, who knows? But they do have regular activity, allegedly, I'm going to say allegedly, because I have not experienced it myself, but people are, have reported having experiences at the Mermaid Inn quite extensively.
Yeah. I mean, I think when it's my time to go, I'm going to be one of these spirits, and just to prove to everyone that there is life after death. And I mean, in your research, the first one says that people have encountered a ghoul rampaging in bedrooms.
I know, that's so
So a gentleman clothes perching on the edge of the guest's bed. Now I'm going to be doing all that. I'm going to be throwing the wardrobes about and everything.
Or rattling chains and appearing in mirrors.
And going ooh, like that. And waking people up, jumping on the bed, and I'll be doing all that sort of stuff. And dragging you up the walls and things.
Great. Entity style.
I'll go
for it.
This.
I do think, though, when you're in a historic building, you've got psychological triggers that may make you feel that there's something more going on. I mean, they're rickety, they're creaky old buildings, aren't they, generally? Icy cold during the night, that's not uncommon because heating systems are usually not the best in those kind of places. They're usually hard to heat because the age of the building. Strange noises, could be the settling of an old building, you don't know. Uncomfortable atmosphere. Well, let's be honest, you're in an old building. Sometimes you're going to get a little bit freaked out.
In the location that I'm going to haunt, I'm going to rip the radiators off the wall, so you can quite easily say that it wasn't the radiator coming down.
But how many times have you sort of been out and about? And I know a lot of them sort of like paranormal investigators, they sort of just come across a random building, and because it looks old, and they always say, "Oh, I'd love to investigate that." You think, well, why? You don't know nothing about it. But it's just the allure of the building, the way it looks and stuff. So look.
Well, I mean, I can understand that, but sometimes people are drawn to those type of buildings. I mean, I like them, and I would do an investigation in them, knowing nothing about it, and then if I experience anything, I could take that away, research the building, and go, well, actually, that ties in with what I've actually experienced.
Yeah.
And for me, that sort of validates my experience. But I would still go back to see whether or not I can recreate it and look at things logically to see what I experienced, whether or not it was genuinely paranormal activity or was it, I don't know, as you said, the pipes cooling down or the wood, whether the environment and the weather sort of made the wood swell or whatever.
All I know, these places make, with the ghost stories linked to them as well, it makes the perfect paranormal investigation area. Now, we couldn't go much further in this discussion regarding Smugglers without referencing Jamaica Inn. And now, I didn't even want to start looking at this topic because I know two people that know a heck of a lot more than I do. So please welcome to the show Karin, Beassant and CJ Symonds, Colin Symonds. Hi guys, how are you?
Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having us.
Oh, you're very, very welcome.
Thank you.
Now, these guys run the paranormal side of the Jamaica Inn, but they're also research. Now, when I talk about researching, this is the in-depth research that needs to be done on locations, so they can back up maybe what they find paranormally with historical facts. It's a two-way street. We've talked about this quite a lot over the time. So, Karin, are you the main researcher, or is it CJ these days? Because you've both done a heck of a lot of work on this, haven't you?
It's Karin that does the main research, and to be quite honest, it's her passion.
Bless you. I've had a compliment after all these years.
What's he after, Karin? That's what I want to know.
A little couple more weeks peace and quiet, that'll do me really well.
It's going stir crazy in lockdown.
But you see, Colin is very clever and he remembers a lot of history, even though he pretends he detests it.
Yeah. History is good in its place, in the past. Just put it that way.
Blasphemer.
Now, Jamaica Inn is in the UK probably the best known location. It's got the Smugglers Museum there anyway, but it's also it's so iconic, isn't it, Jamaica Inn, mainly because of Daphne du Maurier writing the book on it.
Yeah.
How true is it that smugglers were there at the inn?
Colin, you want to go?
Well, I mean, there would have been, and it would have been used as smugglers, as a smuggling point. But what you've got to look at with smuggling and around that area, they would have had many different areas they would have gone to. There would have been inns and places on the coastline they would have gone to. There would have been caches up on the moor, so they would use trading inns and coaching inns along the route. So really, smuggling, it was all over. It's not really located to one specific spot, I shouldn't imagine. But if I'm incorrect on that, I'm pretty sure Karin will correct me on that. But it's not isolated. It's not just in one area. It goes all around. So there were smuggling gangs all over the place, to be quite honest.
It's not that near to the coast, is it, Jamaica Inn?
No, it's right in the middle. So why, when you think about it, a smuggler, they smuggled the contraband, so they brought it in. It would have been quite a trek to bring it from the coastline all the way up to the Jamaica Inn. So there would have been other areas that they would have called in first. But it would have been probably a meeting place for them. At the end of the day, they would have come together there. They would have planned their routes more than probably, because it's right in the middle. So you got both coastlines.
Yeah, I sort of get the idea that it's more of a waylay point, as you said, Colin. They're sort of distributing the contraband, and that just would have been a place they would have stopped off as part of their route inland. But yeah, that is very interesting.
Karin?
One of the things I think you need sorry, because she's got me going now, love. One of the things you have to remember as well is a place, Bodmin Jail. It's not that far from Jamaica Inn, so why would a smuggler and smugglers want to route around that area, being so close to Bodmin Jail, where the peelers would have been? So really, they would have skirted it. I would say more along the lines it was as you said, a waypoint meeting area. But who knows?
Karin!
Quick, get in first.
During our research, if you know the layout of the Jamaica Inn, and you go up the stairs to what we call the old block, the original building, and you take a left and a direct right, there's a square window, and there's a fascinating folklore that a candle would be lit, which would shine over across the moor and the big hill they call Brown Willie, to let them know if the coast was clear. I don't know if it was on, off, whatever, but as Colin said, a meeting place. But you also have to remember Bodmin Moor, as it was a vast area, considering the size of Cornwall. There were only so many tracks and roads because there wasn't tarmac. And if you had a cart laden with goods, it had to go over a good surface so it didn't get stuck, especially in the winter. So, Bodmin, Jamaica Inn, Launceston, Oakhampton, that's how it went up. Now, the trading routes, the coaches, contraband was sneaked into items. Now, Colin can tell you a fascinating story about fruit at the Jamaica Inn and one concept of how it got its name, and not by the governors of Jamaica from the Trelawney family.
Colin?
Well, it's mainly it's up on the Ghost Hunting page, the Jamaica Inn Ghost Hunting page. I believe an author actually put it up. His belief was that the Jamaica Inn wasn't called the Jamaica Inn. It was called the Jam Maker Inn, because a story went that smugglers came along with, and let's be quite honest, back in the day, fruit was quite sought after. So they brought in a lot of strawberries and fruit, took it to the Jamaica Inn. They were there. The peelers came up unexpectedly. So the landlord apparently put the fruit, the contraband, into big barrels and left it in the barrels. And the peelers stayed there. I don't know if it was a few nights or whatever, because I haven't read it for a while. It's up on there. And when they went back, when the peelers went and they did their examination of the Jamaica Inn, which I presume what they were there for, they stumbled across it, but they couldn't do the landlord at the time because the fruit had purified. So it became a jam. And they've never had jam at that time. So basically, they couldn't be done for smuggling because the actual fruit fermented in the barrels. Now, if you actually go onto the Jamaica Inn Ghost Hunting page of the visitors' posts, you'll be able to see the more detailed account that the person had put out. But there's no specific proof of that. That was put up on there. But I did find it really, really interesting to think, could there be? Because there's always a basis of truth in folklore. It always starts with something. So did something that actually did happen? Probably, but quite in all fairness, it could have happened.
Has that ever come to light within the paranormal investigations that have been going on there?
Well, strangely enough, Paul, we were doing an investigation one day. We were up in room, I think the new room that's just been done, Karin, room 4?
Three.
Room 3. When it's just been renovated, that room. But about a year ago, I had a number of guests up there, and we were talking, and I was telling them about this story and said, go and have a... because it is fascinating. I said, try out, because they wasn't getting no activity. I said, try out calling out for and talking about the Jamaica Inn. So they did. And when they did, they had all sorts of things happen in the room, but it only happened once. It hadn't happened since. And we have actually tried it with other groups, but nothing's ever happened. But in that particular time, when we were talking about it in the room, everything went absolutely haywire. We were all taken back by it. But again, it's quite strange.
Yeah.
The other thing you have to remember, at the height of the smuggling, so from 1750, when the Jamaica Inn was called the New Inn, to around about 1778, when they started building, the annex, the stable block, etc., the inn was run by a chap called John Broad. Now, his brother, James, took over around about 1780, something like that. And what I don't understand, by then, they didn't just rent for a 99-year lease from the Trelawney family a little inn. There was farmland, there were barns, it was a big undertaking. So why would John Broad leave there to go to a tiny little pub in the nearest village at Altrincham? Because there's this rumour, we can't find if it's fact, but the brother was supposed to be, this John was supposed to be accused of murder. I can find nothing to corroborate it, I don't know if it's true or not, but whenever we do experiments paranormal-wise and accuse John of this, we seem to get a reaction from the one that we think's there, the big man, James Broad. And it's fascinating, but how lucky are we to carry on this research to see if we can corroborate any of this? Exactly. But you have to be careful to not turn a presumption into a fact.
Yes, very much so.
And those two main characters, and then when James died by 1801, his wife carried on. Both brothers married two sisters.
Aww.
It's Glanvilles, I think it's such a fabulous story. But they would have been the main characters to do with the smuggling around there. And also you have to remember the gangs.
Karin, that's if the smuggling was there, because we have to be honest, we've got no evidence whatsoever that there was actual smuggling taking place at the inn. That came about through the Daphne du Maurier book and her writings. But in all fairness, it goes back to there would have probably been smuggling going on and in and around that area, to be quite honest with you.
Well, can I quote a fact that I only found today? That 1749, 30,000 gallons of French brandy was smuggled from Newquay to Plymouth. So it would have gone along that trade route. And along the way, everyone was in on buying it. As Colin said, the gentry. some of the revenue men or custom men, whichever you want to call them, were bribed. You know, it was a huge market, and that was every month. One thing, a quarter of the tea from the country was smuggled in. Yeah. You know, I think we have no idea of the enormity of this trade. They go on about drugs trades now, but that was huge.
And everyone would have benefited in the community because at the end of the day, they would have been getting cheaper goods, and everyone would have been involved in it. This is what a lot of people sort of seem to miss. You know, we tend to look at it more from modern eyes, where smuggling is sort of, you know, we just tend to put it to see the drug trade now and stuff like that, and that is sort of like scowled upon. You know, it is looked upon as quite low. But back then, no, was the, you know, everyone would have been involved.
But you only have to look at some of the goods. Farmers. Yeah, you only have to look at some of the goods that were coming through the smugglers. Yeah. It's not. I mean, yes, there was the brandies and, you know, the rums and stuff like that, but you also had like lace and wool and tea and coffee, you know, not coffee, but, you know, those things. So these are everyday commodities, aren't they? You think tea is an everyday commodity. And like you say, the amount that's being bought in. It was interesting what you're saying about the jam making, because it's documented that if the customs men went onto a ship before it left port over in France, they would do something called barrel dipping to make sure the depth of the barrel was what it was supposed to be, to make sure that it hadn't been partitioned halfway through to store contraband halfway through, which we talked about earlier in the show. So these things were, these methods of transporting goods were well known. That, you know, that came in because this method was used to get the goods over. But it was a huge, huge undertaking, and that's one thing that surprised me. Because it's that romanticised vision, isn't it, of smuggling, very much so. And also, the other thing we've talked about earlier on was the caves. You know, very rarely were the caves used. It was like barns of farmers or hidden in the shifting sands and stuff like that. Because when you think about it logically, caves are not the safest place to hide dry goods, you know, that you don't want to get wet or, you know, to transport them. There are places, but it's more unlikely than likely. And the undertaking was hundreds of people involved in this. It was
exactly. You had farmers that craftily would send down their donkeys to collect sand to put on their fields as manure. Now, it was also a great cover when a ship would sneak in. The same donkeys and the farmers' men would go down to help with loading the goods up off the beach. They created special sloping paths, especially for the donkeys. Yeah. I mean, Colin's passion is the big difference between, you know what, if you want to say about that, Colin.
Yeah, Colin, bring that in.
That basically, you've got to look at what a smuggle was. And they did range. You did have gentry that were mainly the ones that were in charge. They would take a bribe, but the ones that did the work on the floor, basically did the smuggling, did the fetching, did the carrying, did the hiding. They were just the common folk around there. Now, what people they should realise, and if you're down in Cornwall, they will know that Bodmin Moor is covered with pits, which is tin mines. And there was lots of tin mines, so there was lots of tin miners down there. Now, this is where I think the difference between a smuggler and a wrecker comes in, because people refer to a wrecker as a smuggler, and they're not. As I was saying before, they are poles apart. Wrecker, in my opinion, and from what I found out, is basically a tin miner. If a ship was wrecked, these people were so poor that they would just literally run down if they got whiff of a ship being wrecked and grab, because wood was a commodity to them at the end of the day. Sails was a commodity. Sails would have been a blanket to keep you warm. Miners lived very in stone cold buildings around. Some of them probably lived on the mine sites themselves, and the gentry didn't really care for them very much because they were just labour at the end of the day and paid pittance. So that's where I think the wrecking side of it came, because if you did go down to the coastal towns and you went down there and said to them, or, this town was born on wrecking, a lot of them, the old ones, would literally shoo you out of the because they were never known as wreckers, and they would tell you the wreckers came from inland, and inland was where the tin miners were. And you also got to think of when a ship was wrecked, whether it was literally or deliberately or what really, or even by accident, the company would probably employ somebody to go down there and actually strip the ship. Hence the terminology, wrecking a ship.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing is you can't legally own goods from a wrecked ship if there's one member of the crew still alive.
Exactly.
So there have been there were stories, I'm going to say stories because I didn't find any true accounts, of people, they're finding up washed up sailors that got wrecked and were actually killing them because they wanted the goods. That's how desperate. And I think you also have to be very contextual in time of how desperate people were in those days. We have a very romanticised view of like the 1800s, and it was actually for the common folk, it was very desperate times. Excise was through the roof. That's why these things happened.
I found a fantastic story this morning of an old reverend that was given the last rites to an old chap, and he said, "You don't remember me." And he said, "Why?" He said, "Many years ago," he said, "you walked along a coastal path." He said, "You said, 'Good evening.'" And the Reverend said, "Yeah." He said, "I couldn't decide whether to take the long route or the short route home, but I took the long one." He said it was very wise because we had a delivery, and if you'd taken the short route, you'd have been thrown over the cliffs. True story.
But also, there is no evidence to suggest that people would deliberately go down on top of the cliffs or the mountains with a lantern to try and wreck a ship deliberately. There's just no evidence of it whatsoever. And you can search the internet, the resource. There is just nothing of it. There was only one account of one person ever being found guilty and caught, and that was the little boy. And Karin's going to go mental with me because I've forgotten his name again.
William Pearce.
That's it, William. And he was caught. Apparently, it's the only known documentation of somebody being done for wrecking down in Cornwall.
This is where
this
is where though the wrecking and the smuggling get confused, isn't it? Because smugglers used to signal the ships for when it was safe for them to go out or come closer or whatever. And this is where it gets confused because that is a technique smugglers use to communicate with the ship coming in with the smuggled goods for them to come in. So like you say, it's like this is where the terminology between wreckers and smuggling gets confused. And all these tales start interweaving and getting confused, and people don't look into the history, and they use those terminologies interchangeable. Now, going back to Jamaica Inn, they have got the Smugglers Museum there, haven't they? What kind of artefacts are in there?
We've got many different artifacts in there. I've got to be quite honest. When you go in there and you look at the cabinets and you see how ingeniously they were at trying to conceal. I mean, we've even got a wooden leg down there where it was hollowed out, where somebody would smuggle probably tobacco in. It goes throughout the ages. There's lots of artifacts there that show you in cans, oil cans, even in coming up into more modern times with petrol cans and how they would put it in petrol cans. But the leg and the wooden, hollowing out a wooden piece of wood that they would use for something else, and a little... You lift up a lever and it's all hollowed, and that's where they would put all the stuff in. But one of the stuff that they did do, and this was the smaller things, probably the wooden legs and the stuff like that, is the opium. Opium was also smuggled and brought in. because that was widely used back in the day. So the smaller little containers that they did, it was just ingenious how they came up with the ideas to get this stuff in and get it past, like modern day, the customs, really, at the end of the day.
Well,
books hollowed out with jewellery in, potatoes hollowed out, and items put inside. You know, sometimes myself and Colin, we forget because we're so used to being there. And, you know, you walk into the museum and you think, oh, my God, why haven't I seen that before? Because you just totally ignore the vast array that's there. And lately it's starting to be changed over and more things added and things changed around, you know, to keep the interest of the museum. And, yeah, I looked back and I didn't realise the early smuggling went on from, I think it was from 800s onwards. You know, it's been part and parcel of life. And then, of course, when the king would put taxes on to pay for the wars, smuggling increased. And at the height of the 1700s and the early 1800s, you had the French wars. Hence why Sir William Peel, I think it was 1841, he changed the import duties, and then there was no need to smuggle the tea, the brandy, that sort of thing. It's a fascinating read, you know, and we forget how fabulous our UK history is.
Yeah.
At times.
I would agree.
But one of the things in relating to smuggling you need to remember as well is right up until this present day, it's still going on down there. There is still smuggling going on to this day. Because there are lots of things that are still coming in that people don't want to know about. You go on now, and if you read the news, you see like bales suddenly appearing in the sea. All right, it's all drugs, but the smuggling is still continuing to this day. And I wouldn't be as surprised if some of them don't even use some of the old smuggling caves, to be quite honest with you. Along the Cornish lines, they're probably killed for that. But, you know, you just don't know. In fact, that there was an actual Coast Guard driving past or, going past on their patrols, and they came across a bale. And when they followed it, it went up onto the shore, and there must have been I think there was about 10 bales, and that was marijuana. So
whereabouts was that, Colin?
Yeah, that must have been some party afterwards.
But it is the coastline down that way is so rugged, and I don't think you can discount how hostile actually that whole area is around Jamaica Inn, and you know the Devon and Cornwall coasts are very, very hostile environments for sailors to navigate. They would be incredibly difficult for the preventatives or the customs men to actually police. So it was like an ideal breeding ground for that trade, really, wasn't it? Or isn't it?
Where they get caught. You read about there was a thing this morning about someone having their head bashed in. You know, you need to recount that story.
Oh God. There was an altercation between like the customs and the smugglers, and the guy got shot in the head, and 2 spoonfuls of brains had come out, and he actually said,
Two?
Yeah, just 2. And the smugglers were sort of saying, we would be very pleased, basically, if you could save him, because then they wouldn't get done for murder. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, but 2 spoonfuls of brains came out, so the chances are they weren't going to be able to save him, what with the medical knowledge back in those days. But it was like, they would be very gratified if they could save him, you know. I was like chuckling away at the language, and I thought that was a report in a newspaper that Karin had sent me, and I was sitting there thinking, you wouldn't get that kind of reporting now, would you? That honesty.
The language is so different, and that's one of the joys of reading these historic accounts. It's just some of the language they use. It's fascinating.
Yeah,
I mean, at the time, it's most important when you're talking about it, and especially going back to the smuggler side of it and the wrecker side of it, the history of it, is actually finding the truth behind the folklore. because wherever you go, there's always folklore. But with folklore, there's always an element or a start of a truth. But it's just elaborated over the years. And, you know, from our perspective, Karin's and mine, I mean, we're lucky to be able to be at the inn for about 5 years. In fact, we celebrated our 5-year anniversary not so long ago, before this virus came through. So, you know, what we've been doing is taking that folklore and finding out the facts behind it. And that's what makes the huge difference.
Yes.
It's because, you know, at the end of the day, there's always an element of truth where there's a folklore. It always started at some point. And it's finding that original point is where I think Karin gets her fascination, because that's the history part of it for her. Whereas for me, it's a case that, yeah, I like delving into it, but Karin's the one that mainly deals with the history. She got a better mind than what I've got. Don't tell her I said that, mind.
Well, we found this earlier in the show. We were talking about some of the myths and folklores that were spread by smugglers to keep away people that weren't, and a lot of folklore stories from the black shark to white lady ghosts and all sorts of other methods that were used by smugglers to keep the people not in the know away from that area at the particular time. You know, the Hadley gang in Suffolk used phosphorus to on the gown of a lady to walk around who was in on it to keep away the populace. The black shuck down in the Devon, Cornwall areas was used. It was already a folklore down there, but they employed that as a folklore to keep people not in the know, in and away from the area. You know, we discussed those earlier in the show. So it just goes to show that some of the folklore has been well employed by certain members of society.
And you have to remember that people were illiterate. So if you had a small village and someone said there was a ghost over there and not to go there, they would be too scared to do it.
Yeah.
You know, today, I think we would have been running to it. But back in the day...
Yeah, hundreds of ghost hunting teams are going to converge on that area, you know. Whereas back in the day, they were superstitious and fearful people, you know, so they would stay in. And, you know, given the conditions they were living under and the hostility of the environment, you're not really likely to be out and about. But to reinforce it, they would spread these rumours of various supernatural, shall we say, happenings.
Well, you think about it, and
that's where the witchcraft came into play as well down there, because they would use that as you don't want to go into them woods or that area there. It's cursed, being cursed by the old lady or the healer. 90% of the times they were healers. They were never black witches. But they would use anything and any methodology to scare off people or to put people off. And back in them days, it was rife that people would believe.
Yes.
If somebody said that there was a curse there, they wouldn't go anywhere near it. Nope. So there was lots of things, elements that were used. But I also think that when you go down to Bodmin Moor, you'll see a lot of what they call witching stones, witching circles. I mean, they could well be witching circles, but they could also just be a decoy to say you don't want to go near that area because that's a witch's circle.
Funny enough, when we were researching Launceston in the beginning, we were looking at a double hanging in Launceston 1821, and I've forgotten the name of this witch, but there was a local witch that cursed someone, and it was in the local papers. And it's like, you know, this woman was believed as a witch. You know, 1821. You know, they wouldn't cross her. You know, and you think, my God, people go on about the famous witch trials and everything. They still carried on. There was that woman that was tried as a witch during the Second World War.
Helen
Duncan.
Helen Duncan,
So they still had that in place, that law, that they could try her as a witch. Yeah. You know, oh my God, think of all the old laws that are still active now.
On that note, we're going to wrap this up because we've come off the topic. We're going to go off into a whole different topic if we carry on. I'd like to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge regarding Jamaica Inn and the smuggling perspective of it, and that it was more likely to be a distribution point more than anything else. We'd love to have you back on another time to talk about let's go into the witchcraft next time you come back on. Why not? That's a whole topic. That's a whole topic.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I diversed a little bit there with the witchcraft, but it was parcel of it still.
That's Colin's passion, is that. Now, we went down to a, what was her name? Alex, at the antique place in Cornwall. Right. And she had 5 original, what were those? The witching needles, that they would poke. And she had them on, she had them on consignment to sell. I think they were like £400 or £500. If I had had the money, the history with these. Wow.
You can imagine what I was like, Harry. I was like drooling all. I just wanted them, but there was just so much money to get.
I can imagine. Now, where can go? I know we can't book for now, but it's going to open up at some point again for paranormal investigations. How can guys book anything to do with Jamaica Inn through you guys? Give yourselves a shout out.
Well, currently at the moment, obviously, because the inn is completely closed down and we don't have a date when it's going to be reopened. We're going from month to month. We've had to cancel now the May events, and we'll look in May then at what happens for June. But if people keep an eye on the Jamaica Inn ghost hunting page, we'll always put up updates on there of what's going on to the public nights. And we've only got, I think, 3 Karin private hires. Well, obviously one's had to be cancelled. Yeah. We've got another 2 coming up, but we don't know. So we're not cancelling them until we actually hear from the inn on whether they're open, because not only that, you've got to take into account when these places reopen, and this goes for every hotel, every place, because of the lockdown, they're going to be inundated with people wanting to go down and get a break. So if people keep an eye on our Jamaica Inn ghost hunting page, then they will find out when we're going to be reopening for ghost hunts, public ones and private ones.
And I just want to say, please do, for any location or any hotel or area of interest that you want to visit, please keep an eye out on that. These places are going to need your trade to help them post-lockdown. So please keep an eye on those pages, and as soon as you can. Yes, it's going to be busy. Yes, it might be a little while before you get in, but it's well worth it, particularly somewhere like Jamaica in Bodmin.
And following, obviously, the COVID rules, how frustrating for myself and Colin to have a building that's closed. We could go down there, but it would be unethical at this time. But imagine having that historic location for a few days, just 2 of us. It
would be amazing. But like you say, at the moment we're all following the rules, and you should follow the rules for your own safety as well as other people's safety. So stay home. There'll be a time we'll all come back. We'll all be allowed back out in the field at some point, but. For now, follow the rules, definitely. But keep an eye on those pages for any location you're interested in. As soon as information's coming through, and they're allowed to, under the government guidelines, they will allow you to start booking. So keep an eye on those pages. So it's on Facebook. It's the Jamaica Ghost Hunt Inn page, right?
Yep.
Keep an eye on that page. Thank you once again for joining us, and no doubt we'll get to speak to you very soon.
Thank you for having us.
As you can see, it's an absolutely fascinating topic. You know, when we start looking at smugglers, it's an absolutely fascinating topic, from how they actually did this, the size of the operation, the size of the gangs, what the contraband was, the reasons why, you know, some of the stories that are linked to it and the locations that are linked to it, you know, and how it... You know, like we've just heard, Jamaica Inn isn't actually on the coast. It's like on the trade routes. So it was involved in the smuggling operation from possibly that angle. What do you think, guys? It's been an absolutely amazing whistle-stop tour of smugglers, hasn't it?
It has, and it's as you said, as you like to say, and it leads you down so many rabbit holes, and it's just amazing. The sheer magnitude of the operations is just amazing.
I like the way it sort of put it into sort of more of a context. So, because, with smugglers' tales, and they are sort of romantic and fun to sort of look at. But I just hope we've managed to impart some to give a bit more depth to the story, and and there were sort of real people involved in this, and it was not a sort of like a solo operation particularly. What I found out and during this show was simply the scale of the operations that were going on.
Oh, totally, and how organised it was as well. I think there's a very definite difference between smuggling and wreckers, that has to be defined, and how we've looked at, ghost stories and folk tales that surround various locations and legends around the areas where smuggling was taking place. Some of it was utilised by the smugglers as stories to keep people away. And how you have to probably look into locations a lot deeper than necessarily thought to see the link between alleged paranormal activity and the smugglers. Just because it's been banded as smugglers does not necessarily mean that it is. Anyway, on that note, guys, we've actually come to the end of the show.
Really?
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
Okay, cool.
Going quick, didn't it?
That did. It goes so quick when we do these.
And there was so much more. We found out that, we've run out of time to bring to you guys. You go onto the internet, have a good look. There's some amazingly historical sites out there detailing some of the other gangs that we haven't even had a chance to look at tonight. It's well worth a rabbit hole search for you guys out there. And we will be back with you next week, bringing you another brilliant topic. And next week, we're going out onto the high seas, and we're going to delve into the realms of superstition and that kind of thing. Superstitions of the ancient mariners, aren't we, Paul and Richard?
We are. It's going to be there.
Oh, you can have lots of impressions from Kerry of, you salty sea dogs.
Or actually, as I prefer to do, is ooh-ah, which doesn't translate anyway.
The Wurzels take to the high seas next week, so don't miss it.
Yeah, we'll see if we can get Richard's advert into the mix as well.
You never know. We might be able to link that somehow. I'm sure we will. On that note, in the meantime, if you miss any of our past shows, you can go over to www.paranormalconcept.com, where you'll find a link to all of our past shows, as well as all of our blogs and links to our social media pages. So go over there if you're missing a little bit of our Paranormal Concept people. On that note, we'd like to bid you all a farewell until next week. Goodbye.
Goodbye.